Welcome everyone. It is 3 p.m. and it's time for the Server Room show. This is episode 26. Thank you for SDF Public's Unix server system for hosting the server, and I always mess this one up. That's why it is a live show. You can find all the information regarding to contact and previous shows and episodes on victormadaras.freeshare.net. And as I was told not to waste time with the intro section, which previously was always like 10% of the whole show, so nearly like 2 minutes from the 30 we have on air right now. That's why I started to cut this short. Today, Saturday, I want to talk about, instead of something heavy topic and these big philosophical things which probably put everyone who listens to sleep, just something easy, which is something recently happened to me. Actually, my workstation, my computer. By the way, the ones who following on twitch.tv, the live feed, there is no webcam because there is no hairdressers just yet on this half of the world, and my hair is getting longer, and the tiara looking handband I'm wearing makes me very attractive, but not enough to show my face online just for today. So no webcam window there, but you can see something else which I will talk about just now, and that is that since I moved to Fedora 32 on my workstation on this Fujitsu one, and probably you know, the ones who saw the video recordings or the live feeds of the show, that I was using Gnome, and actually I was using Gnome since like forever, because most of the Linux distributions I used and I stick with came with Gnome by default. That was the one I got used to a long time ago, and I was always lazy to switch to something else. Actually, I did try KDE back in the day, but I remember that it was way before this Pulse era they have now, and I remember that in the beginning it looked good, and then I had a lot of crashes while I was using it. X server was or KDE desktop was crashing on me when I was opening an app or something, always somewhere in the middle of when I was trying to do something pretty basic. So each time I tried to venture outside from the realms of Gnome, I ended up burning myself. And up until a couple of days ago, I was still using Gnome because it just worked for me. But what I figured out since I updated to Fedora 32, that I don't know, it had to do with the plugins, the GNOME extensions I had activated, which worked pretty fine on Fedora 31. I didn't have an issue. Or changing to Brave browser, I mentioned in a previous episode, a Chrome-based browser, or the mix of these two, or actually it could have been just an issue with GNOME or my machine, who knows. But I started to have very laggish performance up to a point where I was clicking on something in GNOME, and it started to take seconds to actuate. So like trying to click on the top right button to lock the screen, for example, it took 3-4 seconds to actually actuate. And first I recognized this in Brave browser, and I started to claim or blame the browser itself, because it was something new. Previously I was just using plain as Brave, plain as Chrome, but messing around with Brave and making sure it was up to date, it seemed that it has nothing to do with it, and it is not. only was happening to me in the browser. It was happening in these other places I mentioned. Even when I was trying to play back video, which previously worked perfectly fine in VLC or MPV, it started to drop flames, slightly noticeable at first, but I remember that it was never there before, and like I said, Brave browser was the one which first showed these symptoms. I was trying to switch tabs. I always have a lot of tabs open, and after a while switching tabs became like a matter of seconds to switch between tabs instead of being instantaneous. And of course I had extensions added to Brave browser, so I said, okay, let me go back to Firefox. I went back to Firefox, and after a while I saw the same thing happening over there as well. As I said, laggish performance in the overall desktop. It's true, I always have a lot of things open, and if you look at the small screen on the bottom, actually it shows my CPU use and open processes I have on the system. It is always a lot, but if you look at it right now, it ventures around 20 some percentage, because indeed now I have many things open. But when I was having this issue with the Gnome desktop, just Gnome itself was taxing my CPU into the ranges of 50-60%, give or take. And yes, as I mentioned, I blamed the browser. I blamed even looked at the Nvidia drivers, because I'm using closed-sourced ones from RPM Fusion. This Gnome driver never really worked for me. I don't know why, but I never had luck with it. And I was fine always with the Ampere Fusion Nvidia drivers, and I even started to look at that, if it's the latest available or what's going on. But it was not the issue. So how I figured it out that it was not the issue, that I said, let me check another desktop environment. Most of the time on other systems I use XFCE, and I pretty much like it. I just never had the chance to use it as my main desktop environment, because as I said, I was used to Gnome and all the little things it does, and this window overview when you hit the command tab or the Windows key or whichever key is the one you have configured, this overlay kind of mission control view kind of thing, like in Mac, and some additional plugins I mentioned previously. I was trying the G Connect extension, which lets you connect to your Android mobile phone to a certain degree. I mentioned it previously. So I had all those plugins and I was comfortable, but I said let me check first in another desktop environment if the performance is the same and how my CPU usage shows, because the computer itself should not be taxed so high. It's a couple of years old now. It's a Fujitsu R940 workstation, single one CPU, a basic 1.6 Xeon 6 core E5-2600 V4, 32 gig ECC DDR4 RAM. It's pretty basic, and with that Nvidia NVS 510 to drive the 4 screens I use natively. So it is a basic machine, but it is nowhere to be a machine to be driven to a point of where it takes a couple of seconds to actuate anything on the computer when you click on something to do. It is also true that lately, since we have this working from home and this rotation that we are 2 weeks at home and 1 week at work, and the rest of the time when we are at home we work from home through the VMware Horizon I mentioned previously. It's true that I don't turn off the computer at night, so I have up times of for example, if you look at it now on the lower right corner, right now I have 2 days 20 minutes because when I did this whole swap and change I had to reboot and everything, but I always had uptimes of a couple of days most of the time before each reboot, and I never had an issue, and this whole thing started after I went to Fedora 32, which the update itself from 31 to 32 went flawless, no problem at all, but this new issue started under Gnome. So nevertheless, when I switched to XFCE to try what's going on, if the computer is doing the same thing, I saw that it has nothing to do. So instead of the 60-ish percentage of CPU utilization only from Gnome desktop, XFCE itself, let me see if there is a chance I can see it. It's there. I tried to grab it while I was speaking. Let's say it's between 9, 10 to 12%, give or take. So it's compared to the 50-some, 60-some percent Gnome alone was taking it. I don't think that it was worth it. So right now, I left some screenshots in the show notes. Even when I have most of my things open, the CPU never really goes above 30% of utilization, even with a lot of things open, and my problem seem to went away. XFCE is very snappy. It definitely lacks a couple of things Gnome itself has, but some of those fancy plugins which I didn't try to find an alternative for the moment, like the G-Connect, or I had the Gnome extension which is doing this kind of tiling window manager thingy. It was 50-50 how it worked most of the time. It was not too bad, but it had its flaws. But for example, many things you don't really have to give up. Also to mention, I always use Xorg X11. Somehow this Wayland thing never really kicked in with me, and when I was to try it in the very beginning, it was always in a pre-phase, and most of the applications were not able to run under Wayland or had no equivalent of running on Wayland, and I don't know how it is today, but I try to read about it a little bit, and some people mentions that it's much better now, but it is nowhere to replace X11 just yet, which, to be honest, for me it's fine. I can live another 20 years with X11, no problem. So coming over to XFCE, you have to give up some of the things, or you have to find alternatives. One of the good things that XFCE can use GTK based applications, for example, those applications which come with Gnome, like the text editor or the notes or whatnot, you can perfectly use them under XFCE. They work fine. And as I mentioned, for some of the other things, you either find alternatives or similar to fulfill the role of the functionality you miss. But in the end, personally, I was very attached to GNOME before, and nearly 3 days or 4 into switching to XFCE, I don't know what was the fuss about GNOME on my side. When honestly, as long as I can open up my applications I need to use and I can organize the windows, and definitely the virtual desktops are pretty much identical to the one the way GNOME implements them. I don't really, that was one of the things I really use heavily, switching workplaces, and I have it in XFCE. I even found some plugins, even though some plugins which I liked, they obsolete right now, but that's just the life of plugins. I guess it happens on GNOME as well, but as XFCE is not in the top 3, let's say, probably they develop less plugins or with less frequency, or they stuck with it ever less often. But I could still find some of the plugins I needed to complement the experience. I really started to use this application switcher, which shows me kind of like in a, if you look at my screen you probably see, which shows me my applications in a drop down, and I'm able to select which one I want to jump to, and no matter on what workspace I am, it brings me to the corresponding to that application. So just with if you look at it now, just with a click I see on which workspace, what applications, what tabs I have there, and I just I can click and move there. So it is pretty nice. I like it. Let me go back. That's where we were. So XFCE is really a nice one in this sense, and I'm going to definitely stuck with it. And like I said, pretty much any window manager where I can organize my windows and tabs is a solution for me. Personally, I'm always open to lightweight window managers or even desktop environments to try them out. And as it may be that they call GNOME the king of the Linux desktop environments, as always there is definitely a lot of options out there to try out. Most importantly, whenever you experience some sluggish response from your computer, or it doesn't perform as it used to, remember it is not always that it's old and need to be replaced. To have the latest and greatest, most expensive, most powerful machine out there, it's not always the hardware. Sometimes it's just something else, like in my case. We discussed previous episodes that we hardly really need the latest and greatest out there to do those couple of things we do every day, even for to do your job or to have fun. So before you blame your computer and you are about to replace it, perhaps it is worth to check out another desktop environment or window manager. In this case, I included a couple of links in the show notes where you can find other some articles about other alternatives. There are tons out there, but you can also give XFCE a try. It has this mouse icon, so I like it, or a mouse wallpaper by default. It is really nice. It is simple. It comes from the continuation or the roots of GNOME 2, as much as I remember. and it is definitely a more simple approach to the desktop itself. So perhaps if you look for something more a bit more gnomish or CAD-ish, then maybe you need to try Mate, because that normally comes up number 3 on many of the comparisons or these articles about the desktop environments. So, and regarding the plugins, you can find a lot for XFCE. Maybe some of them, like I said, you're gonna find them obsolete, but you can definitely do something about it, or replace it with another another plugin, or find an alternative application. Also, what I started to use more often on now that I'm on XFCE is the launcher. One of you in com was telling me about Albert, which is directly competing with Alfred from the Macs, and because, as I mentioned, this Gnome overview thing was one of the things I used a lot, and just hitting the Command or Windows key, I was able to get an overview of my desktop and just type the application I was looking for. Albert on Linux is out of the box doing the same for me without any extra configuration, so I didn't even have to touch the extensions or do any tricky configuration or tricks to make it do what I want. So I have it set to, like you see on the screen, the ones who looking at, by hitting the command key, because that's the one I was used to. I can just start typing what I want. In this case, if I want my terminal managers, I can launch Cool Retro Term, or ZOK Terminal is another one which I use in Wine. Actually, it's a closed source paid terminal emulation, and I purchased the license for it some time ago, and by default they only have it for Windows and Mac OS, but it runs 110% with Wine. So actually that is my main terminal application I use. However, it's being one for Windows, but it has some extra bits and pieces, a lot, which it does. I can show you the website. So as you saw, with the command key or whatever key you assign, you can start typing, and it shows you the corresponding application or whatnot. If I could figure out how to do the same thing, but to or perhaps get another key combination hotkey for XFCE open Windows, like I showed you on a couple of minutes ago, that I can just get a list of my open applications on XFCE. Now, if I could get something else for that, or somehow get those into perhaps in the results of Alfred, so meaning that I would not only be able to browse in my available programs. So if I write if I start typing Firefox, it comes up, but it would also show me that, for example, in workspace main, I have a Firefox tab open, and just with a tap of a key I could switch there. Then I would even need to use the mouse less than I do now. but yeah, I'm getting there, and I'm happy that I'm using now Albert more often in Linux, and I hope that the development is not gonna stall like in many alternate launchers for Linux. It happened in the past. So yeah, ZOK Terminal is this one. Actually, I got this as an alternative for Secure CRT, because that indeed has version for Linux as well, and Windows and Mac. And I wanted to get a license to it last year in Black Friday, and I remember I phoned them up, and I even sent them an email asking if they gonna have any sales on Black Friday or whatnot, and they responded in a tone like, no, we only have full prices and leave us alone, kind of thing. And I said, well, yeah, then I keep using the cracked versions. Thank you very much. I have the Keegans. I wanted to be nice, and I wanted to purchase a license, actually, because I did like the Secure CRT and those other applications, but that's how they were. So I said, then it doesn't worth it. And I started to look around, and I found ZOK Terminal, and I honestly think that it does everything or even more than Secure CRT does. I think if you Google around, you find some articles where they even compare. But seriously, ZOK Terminal from Emtech is much better for me. And with Wine, I can use it under Linux, no problem, out of the box. It has scripting capabilities, and it does everything. Seriously, it emulates any terminal you might be after, including the TN3270, TN5250 for mainframes, and a bunch of others, and with the scripting and logging and proxying, the simple X11 forwarding. It has everything. It has the Rex language for scripting. It is really full-fledged. I kind of miss that they don't have somehow a version for Android for the tablet. I would really buy it. Actually, they do mention that from version 5.12 they run under Linux in Wine. I figured it out on my own without reading it, so that's why I was just checking it now. Now they are on 7.2, so since a long while they are running on Wine under Linux. So we have 2.5 minutes left. No one is saying anything in the chat. So actually I'm being told that one of my favorite cats overseas is wandering around somewhere in the house. So that cat is not listening to me right now, but perhaps he picks it up from the archives or as a podcast, because I love cats, and I love black cats, and this black cat in general, I think he's a fan of me. So yeah, a solid subscriber is a solid subscriber. We cannot deny that fact. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about this journey from Gnome to finally to XFCE, and where it seems I'm gonna stay for long. And I hope it was easier to listen than those other heavy duty topics, or those more academic things when we talk about some, I don't know, like history of Unix or whatever, even though those topics are very welcomed as well, and I like them just as much than when I have to talk from the top of my head with not so much notes in front of me. So thank you very much for listening, and see you next Saturday.